Warning, this episode contains mentions of sexual assault and violence. Viewer discretion is advised. The Levite's concubine. The story. God didn't rise any more judges following the death of Samson, causing Israel to descend into sinful behaviour and idolatry once again, culminating in the murder of a Levite's concubine, and a war between the tribe of Benjamin and the other 11 tribes of Israel. The story begins in the hill country of Ephraim with a man from the tribe of Levi and a concubine from the tribe of Judah. Concubines during biblical times were similar to wives, yet were seen as socially below them, occasionally had fewer rights, and were not married to the man they were involved with. Concubines sometimes bore the couple children if they couldn't, seen with Sarah and Hagar, and Rachel and Leah with their maids, who were Jacob's concubines. The Levite and his concubine had a turbulent relationship, because the concubine left and returned to her father's home in Bethlehem for 4 months. The Levite repented for his sin toward his concubine and travelled to Bethlehem to reconcile, bringing his servant and 2 donkeys. The Levite arrived at the concubine's father's home in Bethlehem, where to his surprise her father was pleased to see him, and the Levite stayed 3 days. The Levite and his concubine reunited and decided to leave for home on the 4th day, but the concubine's father persuaded them to remain another. The next day they attempted to go, but the concubine's father persuaded them to stay, only until the afternoon. Then the couple left and travelled to Gibeah, Jerusalem. It was approaching night when the Levite, his servant, and his concubine arrived at Gibeah, and the servant suggested they spend the night there. The Levite was nervous because the Jebusites weren't Israelites and recommended they lodge elsewhere, deciding on either Gibeah or Ramah. The group settled on Gibeah, part of the Benjamites' land, as night had fallen when they arrived. Yet no one took them until an old man from the same parts as the Levite spotted them sitting in the town square on his way home from a day's work in the field, and offered them accommodation after hearing the Levite's story. While enjoying supper with their host, the male residents of Gibeah surrounded the house and demanded the old man bring the Levite to them so they could have relations with him. The old man begged the men to take his virgin daughter and the Levite's concubine instead. They wouldn't listen to the old man, but they did when the Levite came and gave his concubine to the men of Gibeah. All night long the men of Gibeah abused and raped the Levite's concubine. After her assault, the concubine dragged herself back to the old man's house, where her master the Levite was staying. In the morning the Levite found his concubine laying face down with her hands on the doorstep. The Levite knew something was wrong when she wouldn't get up, so he laid her over his donkey and headed home. He then chopped her lifeless body into 12 pieces and sent one section to the leaders of each tribe. The leaders were disgusted by what they heard, so they, minus Benjamin, assembled an army of 400,000 men and met the Levite in Mizpah to learn more. He recalled in more detail the events of the night and morning, which disturbed him even more. The assembly hunted for the men responsible throughout Benjamin's territory, especially Gibeah where the crime occurred, yet the Benjamites refused to adhere to their demands, preferring instead to declare war with the other 11 tribes, putting 26,000 of their men against the other tribes' 400,000. Yet despite their smaller number, the Benjamites slaughtered 22,000 of the 400,000 on the first day, and 18,000 on the second. The Israelites from the other 11 tribes fasted at the house of God for the remainder of that day, mourning the loss of their 40,000 men, presenting burnt and peace offerings before God, asking for his guidance. God responded, promising to give the Benjamites into their hands. The next day, the 3rd day of battle, the 11 tribes achieved a massive victory. They defeated the entire 26,000 man army of the Benjamites, leaving only 900 remaining, 600 fleeing to the rock of Rimmon, where they stayed for 4 months following the attacks, while the other 300's whereabouts remain unknown. 18,000 were defeated during the destruction of the Benjamites' land, including Gibeah where the original incident occurred. 5,000 were caught on the highways while fleeing, and 2,000 in Gibeah. Following this civil war with the Benjamites, the other 11 tribes met back at Mizpah, where they vowed not to marry into the tribe of Benjamin. Yet the tribes knew they couldn't let the Benjamites die out, despite what they did at Gibeah, and went to the rock of Rimmon to reconnect. with the remaining Benjamites hiding there. The tribes told the men of Benjamin to hide in the vineyard of Shirol during the yearly feast to God, and take a woman of the land when they came to perform their dances. They would then bring the woman to their home in Benjamin, and when their families challenged them, they would state it was not to break their vow, satisfying all that none of the 12 tribes would become extinct. Yet the incident with the Levite's concubine and the civil war with the Benjamites showed Israel needed a king to steer them back to the ways of God. Digging deeper. We'll begin by investigating the similarities between the story of the Levite's concubine and the story of Sodom and Gomorrah from Genesis 19. The main similarity is the intentions of the men from both cities. Both groups want to have relations with the male visitor/visitors. The 2 angels in Sodom and the Levite in Gibeah. In both, the host intervened to prevent their guests from being abused. The old man at Gibeah and Lot in Sodom. Finally, in both situations, the hosts offered other people in the place of their guest. Lot offered his 2 daughters, and the old man offered his 1 daughter and the Levite's concubine. There are some differences between the 2 stories, but the main and most important one is that no one was hurt in Genesis 19, except for the residents of Sodom and Gomorrah, while in Judges 19 the Levite's concubine was. We'll finish this section by examining some interesting things about the concubine and the Benjamite war. In Judges 19 verse 3, the Levite is referred to as her husband, concerning the concubine. This may be a mistranslation, but if not, it's very interesting because concubines were not wives. It could be a sign of a close relationship between the Levite and his concubine, despite the text stating their relationship was strained. The fact he travelled from Ephraim to Judah to make right with her, instead of just abandoning her and moving on, plus humbled himself before her, hoping she would take him back. To me, even though their relationship was fractured at the beginning, the 4-month separation showed the Levite how much his concubine meant to him, so decided to try and woo her back. The Israelites had a mixed reaction to the Benjamites after the death of the Levite's concubine. They were disgusted by the actions of the men of Gibeah, but after defeating them in the war that followed, the 11 tribes mourned the loss of the Benjamite people. This attitude is understandable because the 11 tribes didn't want this result. They wanted to solely punish the men responsible for the concubine's death, not the entire tribe of Benjamin, which is why after the conflict the tribes did everything they could to reverse their brother's destruction, plus they knew not doing so would anger God. What to learn? What should we take away from the story of the Levite's concubine? I believe it shows us the dangers of sin and the consequences that can occur as sinful behaviour goes unchecked. Things started badly with some form of domestic abuse between the Levite and his concubine, leading to the Levite's concubine's death in Gibeah after she was severely abused and raped, leading to the civil war between the Benjamites and the rest of Israel, causing the deaths of over 25,000 men, and finally leading to the men of Benjamin abducting women from Shiloh, because the rest of Israel forbid them from marrying their daughters. As you can see, the situations progressively increased in their severity. The domestic dispute between the Levite and his concubine led to her returning home to Bethlehem. After making amends, they returned to Ephraim, but stopped in Gibeah in the land of Benjamin because it was night. This decision led to the Levite's concubine's attack. The attack on the Levite's concubine led to the civil war between the Benjamites and the rest of Israel, and the war between the Benjamites and the rest of Israel led to the abduction of women from Shiloh, because the Israelites distanced themselves from the Benjamites. How does this apply to us today? Judges chapters 19 to 21 show the domino effect our actions have. It demonstrates how our actions have the potential to snowball and affect not just us and those directly involved, but also those beyond. Although this isn't always the case, and it's highly unlikely anything we do will end as tragic as what happened in Judges, it's still important to consider who we may hurt by what we do or say.